Today's scripture is Luke 24:13 through 35. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. He said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad, and then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some of the women in our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of these weren't with us when we went to this tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets that have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" That beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all of the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were suddenly opened, and they recognized him. He vanished from their sight, and they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed. He has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them by breaking.
Welcome, everyone, to my house. My name is Cleopas. Wow, it is so wonderful to see all of you here. This must have been a long journey for you all. I hear that some of you have come from even, 15 or 20 miles away, and even on a donkey, that's a very, very long journey. You must be very tired, and it is late at night, and so I insist that you stay at my house. Yes, I insist that you all stay at my house. And actually, you must all be you must be very hungry. We need to show you some hospitality. Please, take a piece of bread and pass it on back to the others. I insist. It may be a little strange, but you can eat it now or take it with you. Please, take and pass to others. Pass it back. See, it's important to me that you are all well fed. You must have the strength for your journey tomorrow. You also need to know that, in my culture, hospitality is of the utmost importance. It is an absolutely critical thing for us to show to other people. In fact, it's not just about me as one individual hosting other people. It's about our whole village sharing with the visitors, the strangers that come through in our midst. In fact, you may even know a story about this. You may have heard this before. It's a story that Jesus told one time. It's a parable where Jesus was talking about God answering prayers, but he started off by telling this parable of a man who has a visitor in the middle of the night. And this visitor comes, which is a little bit strange to have a visitor in the middle of the night, but he has to feed this visitor and he doesn't have enough bread. And so he goes to his neighbor and says, "Hey, I need some bread to give, just 3 loaves to give to my visitors. Can you please lend it to me?" And the neighbor starts to make up excuses. He says things like, "Oh, I'm already in bed, leave me alone. The door is already locked, just go away." But eventually, he persists, and the neighbor opens the door and gives him the loaves of bread. See, in that story, the neighbor was actually acting pretty shamefully because it was the responsibility of the whole village to take care of the strangers and the visitors who came through their village. In fact, that was the reason that we took in Jesus that night. That's the reason that I insisted that Jesus come stay at my house in Emmaus after we were walking along. Now, we didn't know that it was Jesus at that point. We thought it was just another stranger. And so we insisted, though. It's just the right thing to do, to take in strangers. Oh, you don't know that story, do you? You haven't heard that yet about what me and my other friends experienced that day. We'll pull up a seat and I'll tell you the story. It is, it's an amazing story. It's probably the most important day of my life, really. And it changed my life completely. It was a Sunday when it actually happened. But actually, Jesus had been killed just a couple of days before that on that Friday. They put him to death on a cross. And, we were in shock. We were just totally and completely had our world turned upside down. See, you got to understand that Jesus had made a name for himself. Everybody knew who this guy was. People looked to him, as all sorts of different things. He was an amazing healer. I witnessed with my own eyes the miracles that this guy did. I saw him take people who had been born blind and give them sight again. I saw people who hadn't walked in 30 years get up and skip down the road with their mat. The miracles that he did were amazing, and people came from the whole country just to be healed by Jesus. He was an amazing healer. But he was more than that, too. He was an incredible teacher. You should see this guy teach the scriptures. He knew the scriptures better than anybody else, better than the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the priests or any of the other religious leaders. He knew them backwards and forwards. But it wasn't even just that he knew what the scriptures said. It was like he knew what God really wanted, not just what was written in the scriptures. It's no wonder that thousands of people would line up on the hillside just to watch him teach. He was a teacher, but he was more than that too. He was an amazing political figure. I tell you, this guy wasn't shy about confronting the people who had lots of power. Even the Romans, he got in their face all the time. He would call these powerful leaders out on the injustices that they were doing, the way that they were hurting people. He would call them to account in a way that was incredibly bold. People looked to him to lead a political revolution, to throw the Romans off of our backs and get them off of us finally after generations. If I'll be honest, that's what I saw in him. That's one of the reasons that I was attracted to him. I thought we were going to have this revolution to shake up the government. And yeah, Jesus was this political leader. But as I found out, he was so much more than that too. There were lots of reasons that he was so popular, that people were drawn to him on all sorts of levels. They'd put a tremendous amount of hope in him. Hope for their daily lives, hope for change in the government, all these different things. And that's why when he was killed on that Friday, it was like the hope of a generation died with him. The news spread throughout all of Jerusalem in a matter of hours. We couldn't believe it. Nobody could. It's also the reason that the news of the empty tomb spread like wildfire on that Sunday morning. See, some women in our group went to the tomb early in the morning and they found it empty. And they started telling just a couple of people, but all of a sudden it seemed like the entire city of Jerusalem knew about it. They found that tomb first thing in the morning, and by lunchtime, the whole city and beyond knew about it. That's partly why I was a little shocked when this guy, this strange guy, comes up walking with us when we were walking back from Jerusalem to Emmaus. He walks up to us and asks us what we're talking about, as if there's anything that anybody else was talking about that day. I mean, we were walking back to Emmaus. It's about a 7-mile journey. It's a good, at least half-day journey or longer. So we had some time to talk and to walk. And so me and a couple of the other people from our group, we were talking about Jesus. We were talking about him being killed and this news of him being brought back to life. Maybe we didn't know what was going on. We didn't even know what that meant for us or what the implications were. But that's definitely what we're talking about. And this stranger walks up to us and says, "Hey guys, what are you talking about?" As if there's anything else that we could possibly be talking about. Now, I have to admit that looking back on it, it is a little funny knowing who this stranger actually was. See, for us, this was, well, we thought he was just a random stranger, but it actually turned out to be Jesus. And the first thing he does when he comes up to us is plays dumb, like he doesn't know what's going on. He says, "Hey guys, what's up?" And then, well, old genius Cleopas decides to tell Jesus what's going on. And I'm not really proud of it, but I thought he was just a stranger who didn't know anything. I kind of told the guy off. I mean, I said, "What, really, where have you been for the last 3 days? Like, do you not know what's going on? I mean, are you the only person in all of Jerusalem who doesn't know about Jesus, about the mighty prophet from God in word and deed? Don't you know about how he was killed on a cross and buried? I mean, don't you know how we thought he was going to be the one to redeem Israel, to set them free, to set us free? And you haven't heard about how this morning that some in our group found an empty tomb, and some even had a vision of an angel saying that he was alive. I mean, how is it possible that you don't know this?" That's what I told him. That's what I told Jesus. He must have been laughing inside of his head. Old Cleopas, talking out of his ear again. It was after that something interesting started to happen. That's when this stranger started to tell us the real story. Now, remember, we thought this guy was a stranger. We thought he was just some clueless guy. And then all of a sudden, he starts to tell us about who Jesus really is. And he starts to go through all of the scriptures, all of the law, the Old Testament, Moses, all of that kind of stuff, the writings, the prophets, all of it. And he starts saying how this points to Jesus and this and that. All these things point to Jesus' life and his death and his resurrection, and how the Messiah has to come and then die and then be raised again. Remember that we had been walking around with Jesus for like 2 or 3 years at this point. I mean, we knew Jesus pretty well. And here's this stranger, like, connecting all of these dots for us. Now, you would think at that point that's when we would see who this really was and we would understand. He is the greatest teacher, obviously, but yet we still didn't understand who we were talking to. We get to the end of the road at Emmaus, and again, he sort of pretends like he's going to keep on walking, which it was late at night and it wouldn't have been safe. And so we said, no, you need to come stay at our house and have a meal and rest for the night, and then you can go on. But you have to stay at our place. Hospitality demanded it. So we invite him in. And that's when the really strange part happened. See, when I host somebody, it's the host, it's the owner of the house that makes sure all the food is prepared, and it's definitely the owner of the house who leads the meal, who blesses the food and makes sure everybody has what they need. But as the meal is getting ready to start, we sit down, and this stranger is the one who stands up and takes the bread, and he breaks it, and he blesses it, and he breaks it, and he gives it to us. And that's the moment. That's the moment that our eyes were opened and we saw Jesus standing right there in front of us. We'd been walking with this guy all day long and we didn't understand, but then when he did what exactly he did at the Last Supper before he was killed, he took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to us. That's when we saw that this was really Jesus. And as soon as we understood and our eyes were opened, he vanished. He disappeared from our eyes. Now, you might expect that we were a little bit excited at this point. We were pretty fired up. The adrenaline started running, and we knew we weren't going to sleep anyways that night. But in the middle of the night, we get up and we run the 7 miles back to Jerusalem in the middle of the night because we've got to find everybody else. We've got to find the rest of the group and tell them what we have seen, what we have experienced walking with Jesus on that road. And sure enough, we find all of the other disciples, and we spend the whole night talking about Jesus because we had seen him with our own eyes. We had walked with him on that road. We had seen that Jesus was alive. It was the most amazing night of my life. And I'd seen some amazing stuff with Jesus. It was incredible. It changed how we saw everything. It changed how we saw ourselves, how we saw the world. It changed how we saw Jesus. We'd been with him for years. But the thing I realized that night was that I had come to Jesus seeing something in him that I wanted to see in him, that I had expectations for him and all of this kind of different stuff, but he was doing something a little bit different. And it was only on that night that I finally understood what it meant for him to live, to teach, to show us his example, to die, and to come back to life. That's when I understood. You know, looking back on that time, I remember right after that happened, I got pretty fired up about Jesus. I mean, I told anybody and everybody about what we had seen, what we had heard with Jesus. And I guess I still do on a pretty regular basis. I tell anybody who's willing to listen about what happened on that road and at that meal. But I do have to say that the more I think about that day, I think more and more, not about the end of the night when our eyes were opened, but I think about that journey. Walking down the road with Jesus and not recognizing who he is, who he was. What I think about is how Jesus was so patient with us. I mean, we thought we knew everything. We thought that we had it figured out. We thought we were telling this stranger what was going on. But we were the ones who were in the dark. And there's Jesus walking with us, patiently explaining it again, waiting for the right moment when the Holy Spirit would open our eyes and we could finally see. You know, come to think of it, it's really what Jesus did in the years before that day, too. I mean, he knew what was going on as he was recruiting disciples and spreading his message. And he knew that we didn't get it. But there he was, walking alongside us, waiting for the day when we would understand. And you know, I'm not going to say that I'm exactly like Jesus. I'm trying to be like him. But you know, that now that I'm the one going out and sharing the gospel, sharing the good news and telling people, well, I kind of understand a little bit more of what he had to put up with us. See, I run into all kinds of different people when I talk about the gospel and the good news and what we experience with Jesus, I run into all kinds of different people. And some people take to the message right away, and they accept it, and they're all on board, and they get it. Other people are pretty skeptical. They're sort of ambivalent, not knowing, well, I don't know about this Jesus guy. I don't know if this is true. I want more evidence. Some people seem to have heard of somebody called Jesus before and seem to be pretty fired up, and they talk a lot about God, but the Jesus they describe doesn't sound like the Jesus that I know. And sometimes I wonder how they can miss it so much. Sometimes people are just outright hostile. We've been run out of several towns and yelled at and had fights and all that kind of stuff. See, when I meet those different kinds of people, I think back to that day with Jesus and him walking along with us. And I always think, if Jesus was so patient with us, if he was willing to walk along with us until we finally understood, shouldn't I do the same for everybody that I meet? Even if people are hostile or ambivalent, shouldn't I walk with them and explain what I know and what I've seen and trust that one day God's Spirit will open their eyes too? All the while simply walking on that path with them. Well, it's getting late, and I need to let you all turn in for the night and to get some sleep and some rest. I sincerely wish you the best on your journey. And I hope that God is with you as you go. I want you all to have a good night. Oh, but one thing before you go to sleep. Tomorrow when you're walking, even if you're walking alone, just remember that maybe somebody's there with you. Have a good night.